Hello, and welcome back to the English Learning Podcast. I'm Jason, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sarah. Hey, Sarah. Exactly. The more you practice, the easier it gets. So, here's a challenge for our listeners. Pick one of these exercises and try it today. Whether it's role-playing, recording yourself, or thinking out loud, just start speaking.
Hey, Jason, and hello to all our amazing listeners. We're so excited to have you here for another episode.
That's right. And today, we're going to talk about something that many English learners struggle with: how to speak without pausing too much. Have you ever found yourself stopping in the middle of a sentence because you can't find the right word? Or maybe you feel like your speech isn't smooth and natural.
Oh, absolutely. That happens to a lot of learners, and even fluent speakers sometimes. But don't worry. In this episode, we'll share some really useful tips to help you speak more smoothly and confidently.
Yes! By the end of this episode, you'll have practical techniques to reduce pauses, keep your sentences flowing, and sound more natural when speaking English.
Exactly. So grab a notebook if you want to take notes, and let's get started.
So, before we talk about how to fix this problem, let's first understand why people pause too much when speaking English. Sarah, what do you think is one of the biggest reasons?
Well, one major reason is lack of confidence. Many learners feel nervous when speaking, especially if they're afraid of making mistakes. So they pause because they're overthinking every word they say.
Yes. And the funny thing is, making mistakes is actually part of learning. But when people hesitate too much, their speech sounds choppy, and that makes them even less confident.
Exactly. Another big reason is thinking in your native language instead of English. Have you ever noticed how some learners pause because they're mentally translating words from their first language?
Oh, absolutely. If you're always translating in your head, your brain has to work twice as hard. Instead of just speaking naturally, you're stuck trying to find the perfect English words.
Right. And that leads to long pauses because you're searching for words. But here's the thing. Native speakers also don't always know exactly what they're going to say next. The difference is they use techniques to keep the conversation going smoothly.
That's a great point. Another reason people pause is lack of practice. If you don't practice speaking regularly, your brain and mouth aren't used to forming English sentences quickly. It's like going to the gym. If you don't exercise, your muscles won't be strong.
Yes, speaking is a muscle. And if you only study English with books or apps but never actually say the words out loud, you're going to struggle when it's time to speak.
Totally. And one more reason people pause a lot is not knowing enough sentence patterns or filler words. When you listen to fluent speakers, they don't always say their sentences perfectly, but they know how to use natural filler phrases like, well, you know, or actually, I think, to keep speaking while they organize their thoughts.
Yes, that's such a great strategy, and we'll talk more about that in the next section. But before we move on, let's quickly summarize the main reasons why people pause too much when speaking English.
All right, here are the 4 big reasons. 1. Lack of confidence, overthinking, and fear of mistakes. 2. Thinking in your native language, translating instead of speaking naturally. 3. Lack of practice, not speaking enough in real situations. 4. Not knowing sentence patterns or filler words, struggling to keep the conversation flowing.
That's it. And the good news is, there are easy ways to fix all of these problems. So, in the next section, we'll share simple but powerful techniques to help you speak more smoothly and naturally.
Yes! So, stay with us. Next, we'll teach you how to reduce pauses and improve fluency. All right? Now that we understand why people pause too much when speaking, it's time to talk about how to fix it. Sarah, what's the first strategy?
The first tip is learning useful filler words. These are words or short phrases that give you a second to think while keeping the conversation flowing. For example, instead of pausing awkwardly, you can say things like, well, you know, actually, let me think. That's a good question. These make your speech sound more natural instead of robotic or hesitant.
That's such a great point. Native speakers use fillers all the time. So, instead of just stopping when you don't know what to say, try using one of these phrases to buy yourself time.
Exactly. All right, what's the next strategy?
Think in English, not in your native language. We talked about this earlier. If you're always translating in your head, you'll have lots of pauses. Instead, try to train your brain to process ideas directly in English.
That's so important. One way to do this is by describing things around you in English throughout the day. For example, if you're walking in the park, try thinking, the trees are tall, the weather is nice today. This helps your brain get used to forming English sentences quickly.
I love that. It's a simple but powerful habit. Another great strategy is using sentence patterns and prepared phrases. Instead of always searching for words, memorize common sentence structures you can use in any situation.
Right. Let's give our listeners some examples. If someone asks, what do you do? Instead of pausing, you can use a simple sentence pattern like, I'm a housekorsav and I hajkorsu. So, for example, I'm a student and I'm studying English. Or if you're ordering food at a restaurant, you can always say, can I have a DUI? These patterns make speaking much faster and easier.
Exactly. Instead of thinking about every single word, you just fill in the blanks. Okay, let's move on to another technique. Practice speaking with a timer.
Oh, I love this one. It's super effective. Here's how it works. Pick a simple topic like my daily routine and set a timer for 30 seconds. Try to speak without stopping until the timer ends. Then increase the time to 1 minute, then 2 minutes.
Yes, this trains your brain to keep talking, even if you make mistakes. And the more you practice, the easier it gets.
Totally. And speaking of practice, another powerful technique is the shadowing method. Jason, do you want to explain that one?
Of course! Shadowing is when you listen to native speakers and repeat exactly what they say. At the same time they say it, it helps improve your fluency, pronunciation, and rhythm. You can do this with YouTube videos, podcasts, or even movies.
Yes, and you don't have to understand every word. Just focus on copying the sounds and intonation. It's like training your brain and mouth to work together more smoothly.
Such a great tip. All right, before we move on, let's quickly review the 5 strategies we talked about today.
Here they are. 1, use filler words like well or let me think to keep talking. 2, think in English instead of translating from your native language. Use sentence patterns so you don't have to search for words. Practice with a timer to build confidence and fluency. 5, try shadowing to improve rhythm and pronunciation.
If you practice these techniques regularly, you'll start speaking more smoothly with fewer pauses.
Yes, and in the next part, we'll show you how to use these strategies in real-life conversations. So, keep listening.
All right. Now that we've learned some great strategies to reduce pauses, it's time to talk about how to apply them in real-life situations. Sarah, what's one of the best ways for learners to practice fluency in daily life?
One of my favorite ways is role-playing conversations. Find a language partner or even talk to yourself in front of a mirror. Pretend you're ordering coffee, introducing yourself, or asking for directions. The key is to practice real-life situations, so you feel more comfortable when they actually happen.
That's such a great tip. In fact, let's do a quick role play right now. Imagine I'm ordering coffee at a cafe. Listen carefully to how I use filler words and sentence patterns to sound natural. Ready?
Sure. Would you like any sugar or syrup with that?
Hi. Can I have let's see, a large cappuccino, please?
That was perfect. Did you all notice how Jason used phrases like, let's see, actually? These small words keep the conversation flowing and make you sound more natural.
Oh, actually, yeah, just a little bit of vanilla syrup. That'd be great.
That's a great exercise. Another fun way to practice fluency is by thinking out loud. For example, when you're cooking, describe what you're doing. Okay, now I'm cutting the vegetables. Now I'm boiling the water. This forces you to think in English without stopping.
Exactly. And learners can practice this at home by recording themselves speaking on different topics. Listen to your own speech and notice where you pause too much. Then, try again and use filler words to keep talking.
That's brilliant. And of course, one of the best ways to improve fluency is just speaking more. Don't wait until you feel perfect. Just start talking, even if you make mistakes.
I love that. And here's another tip talk to AI or voice assistants like Siri or Google Assistant. Try asking them questions in English and see if they understand you. It's a fun way to improve pronunciation and fluency.
Yes, and let us know in the comments which method you're going to try first. Up next, we'll share final tips and motivation to keep you going. Stay with us.
Exactly. The more you practice, the easier it gets. So, here's a challenge for our listeners. Pick one of these exercises and try it today. Whether it's role-playing, recording yourself, or thinking out loud, just start speaking.
Yes. First of all, remember that pausing is normal. Even native speakers pause sometimes. The goal isn't to speak super fast. It's to speak naturally and confidently.
All right, we've covered a lot today. We talked about why people pause too much strategies to speak more smoothly, and even ways to practice fluency in real life. But before we wrap up, let's share some final tips and motivation for our listeners.
That's so true. Another tip is to enjoy the learning process. Watch movies, listen to English music, and have fun with the language. The more you enjoy it, the more you'll improve.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake you make is a step toward improvement. Fluency comes from practice, not perfection.
Yes. So, here's our challenge for you. Try speaking for 1 minute today without pausing too much. Use the techniques we discussed: filler words, sentence patterns, and thinking in English. You've got this.
Absolutely. And one last thing, consistency is key. Speaking fluently doesn't happen overnight, but if you practice a little every day, you'll be amazed at your progress.
And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to unsubscribe, like, and share it with your friends. We'll be back with more tips to help you improve your English.
And don't forget to let us know in the comments. What's the hardest part about speaking fluently for you? We'd love to hear from you.
Bye, everyone. Keep practicing.
That's right. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the English Learning Podcast.